Pokémon X and Y are a decade old. If you were 5 when these games came out, you are now 15. You are approaching adulthood. If you were 8 when these games came out, you can drive a car in certain countries, you can drink in certain countries. That's nuts. It feels like these just came out a few months ago. But no, Gen 6 is a decade old now. Derek, how did you feel about these games when they were new?
I was incredibly excited for them because I was coming hot off the heels of Pokemon Black and White and just love that game to death. And I was, at this point, in the thick of it when it came to coverage for these games. So I was there with these, my initial analysis for it. I was there at E3 when they revealed more stuff about it. Like, I was in the trenches for this game, and it was an exciting time for me. And when it came out, I really enjoyed it. I thought they did a lot of great things and really pushed it forward, and it felt like a nice extension. On reflection, my opinions have definitely lowered a bit, but I still think this is a good gen for what it introduced, and it feels like a stepping stone. I think often Pokemon has stepping stones where the first Pokemon gen, first gen that comes out on a new console is sort of like working out the kinks, and the second one is like when they got a handle on things and like, all right, let's actually go for it this time.
Yeah.
But while my opinion has lowered, I do generally like X and Y.
This is kind of the game that didn't kickstart your career, but it's kind of the game that a lot of people got to know you from. I remember a lot of people like found out about
like
your
me.
analysis stuff, like Daniel through Pokemon X and Y.
It was my first analysis. That's the thing. It's like, it was before the point I was even able to edit. I only did the research, wrote out the script, and then had to have somebody else read it and edit it at that point because I didn't know how to do any of that.
Yeah.
And it ended up becoming people were excited for these games. You have no idea because that video got over 1 million views.
Yeah, jeez.
It was huge, and I remember the excitement of being at E3 when they had the presentation going over stuff and the reveal that you can roller skate and getting it out so it could be tweeted off our main channel, and people going nuts over all the stuff that was being revealed from that presentation. And it's also key because at that exact same presentation, that's how I met Ash.
Yeah. Without this game, we don't know if GVG would be here today.
That's
probably
wild.
not.
Yeah. Daniel, this was the 3D transition for Pokemon. Up until now, it was a sprite-based franchise. How did you feel about this shift to 3D?
It was an interesting shift because I adore sprite art in any capacity, and the way that Black and White 2, both of those, all 4 of those games, honestly, the way that they treated sprite work was so incredible in battle because they would bounce, they would animate, they would have frames of motion, and they looked more animated than sprites had any right to be. So it was kind of sad to depart from that and going into 3D models instead. But at the same time, like anytime a new Pokemon is announced, it's super exciting for me. Honestly, it's always exciting to see the new Pokemon, the new region, trainers, characters, everything about it. And X and Y was not an exception whatsoever. Jumping into it, I'm always very open to changes that Pokemon makes, honestly, despite the fact that, as we looked at before, the overall look of X and Y, in hindsight, is not really as impressive as you might think looking at a 3DS game.
Let's make a quick comparison in a moment. So we've got some screenshots. So I remember when this game's revealed, the most common screenshot, for some reason, was always what's on screen right now, and I don't know why. It was always this screen. It looked super crunchy. It didn't really look 3D, and it looks very similar to a DS game being Dragon Quest IX. In fact, Dragon Quest IX might even look a bit better in terms of detail than what they were showing here. Now, this wasn't the most flattering screenshot. The game can look better than this, but especially in the overworld, it was rather underwhelming. There were other 3DS games that looked way better than X and Y did in the overworld. But
you say that, but there's the Pokemon effect where they don't look good compared to other games, but compared to Pokemon games, like, oh my god, this is such a step up. It looks so gorgeous. Look at the depth. Look how you can run into the screen, and there's all these angles. That's so cool.
I mean, it was different. Like, we were used to just this top-down perspective, and now the camera would shift. And I think the most graphically impressive bit were the Pokemon models, which they are still using to this very day. They've updated them every now and then, but the core frame is still that 3DS model because they were ridiculously high poly. And they tried pushing them almost too far at times. Like, if you've got the 3D effect on, the frame rate will chug. but also they have these multi-battles where you can encounter like 6 of them at once, and then the frame rate really chugs. But they're definitely ambitious with that, but you can't fault the 3D models for looking bad at the very least, because they look great.
Yeah, beyond just being the first game to be, the first Pokemon game to be fully rendered with 3D models and everything, this game, despite the flack that it gets even now, there's a lot of stuff about this that introduce things into Pokemon that are still just the common like mainstays today, like having ride Pokemon, being able to interact with your Pokemon with Pokemon to Me, like actually like taking care of them and petting them and having that kind of deeper connection with them. Wonder trading, where you can just trade back and forth randomly with people. First game with trainer customization, that was pretty major back in the day, because you always had just the base model character throughout your entire throughout that entire game. Fairy types, an entirely new. The last time we got a new type was in this generation. And extending beyond that, we got things like Mega Evolution, which is the first time we got a major gimmick.
Battles.
There's a ton to get into with that one. Yeah,
still the best one.
I mean, every generation since has had its own form of Mega Evolution, and they're never as cool. Like Sword and Shield, like, what if they're bigger? And then Scarlet and Violet, what if they're really sparkly,
shiny?
Yeah, you like shiny Pokemon. Here's shiny.
Like, what if they have a move where they go like this? Like, but yeah. The Mega Evolution's just kind of like, it's just Digivolving, but it's really cool. And they still kind of bring it back every now and then. Like Unite has Mega Evolutions. The anime falls back in it quite often. I think they know it's the coolest one, but I don't think they're ever going to bring it back in the core games though.
No, I kind of doubt it unless they decide to mix all it together, which I highly doubt. I think they like having some new gimmick each time that changes things up in some way. Another big thing about this one is the introduction of the Pokemon Bank, which allowed you to transport from the 5th generation, and to just make that possible. This is the time where it's like, okay, we're going to make it so you can actually keep a hold of all your Pokemon if you want.
And the process to getting them there can be a bit convoluted, especially if they're going all the way from Ruby and Sapphire. But it's so cool that you can do it. It's been a little bit held back now because the eShop's gone down. So unless you downloaded it, you've kind of lost that whole legacy of Pokemon. But it was very cool at the time. The whole reason we're doing this discussion, right, is because of the Pokemon cycle. The Pokemon cycle is a very real thing. When this game came out, it reviewed very well. It got like an 86 on OpenCritic, which is a great score. However, maybe like a few weeks later, the general audience had a very different perception of this game. And I think that's mostly lying in the post-game, which was a little bit lacking. And like, if you look
basically non-existent, let's be honest.
Basically non-existent. If you look at Metacritic right now, I believe it's at an 86 for a critic score and a 75 for a user score. Like 75 isn't a bad score, but it's not a great Pokemon score. However, though, in recent years, I think because people who grew up with this game are becoming adults and they're forming their opinions online, there has been a turnaround. People suddenly really like X&Y, it used to be the punching bag of the franchise. And now there has been this turnaround where people do like the game.
Now we've got Sword and Shield for that.
That's going to happen. No. Sword and Shield will have its time too. In like 5-10 years, suddenly that's going to be a cult favorite. But I do want to talk about if there's actually merit to that, though. Is it just nostalgia, or are these genuinely good games? Because just calling things nostalgia is a blanket statement. There usually is merit behind it. So I do want to look into that. Are these actually good?
I'm going to say yes, but there are caveats. As it said, if you want to play this game for a long time, that's where it struggles, because the post game is kind of pitiful. There's not really much to do battle-wise outside the Battle Maison. And that got kind of boring very quickly. As far as like your extras, you got to collect the legendary birds and Mewtwo. That was it. The legendary hunting was so short in this game. And I remember distinctly being like, oh, I'm done. All right. I was cool with it because it meant less work for me. But I know a lot of people who really get into this sort of thing definitely did not enjoy that aspect. That said, the competitive side, this was the beginning of them trying to make competitive as easy as possible, so you can really more easily customize your Pokemon to be competitively ready. And I think there's merit in that aspect. It's just if you want that single player content of working on stuff, that's where it struggled.
Yeah. They also dived a bit more heavily into training your Pokemon outside of just battle, kind of like what you were just saying. With like Pokemon and Me, you can pet them, you can make them sort of love you, which I guess is an extension of like talking to Pikachu in Pokemon Yellow almost, but it's more involved than that. There's mini games, you can feed them, you can stroke them like Nintendogs. And they've evolved on that since as well, but it was an interesting way of developing relationships with Pokemon rather than just battling. However, this feature didn't really click with me much. I'd rather personally just sort of stick to battling.
It made things a little too easy because it had the side effect of the Pokemon. Like, the Pokemon really wanted to impress you, got a critical hit. Yeah. The Pokemon hung in there for you, 1 HP left. And that can be nice for like a Nuzlocke run, but it did have the side effect of the game rarely challenge you. Like, you'd have a Mega Pokemon knock you out of nowhere sometimes, but overall, nah. I don't remember much difficulty to this game. Which, is fine. It is for kids, but I know some people look for a challenge for this. But I think this was the kind of beginning of like, we're going to go easy on people.
Yeah, those aspects still kind of exist even today, but it felt like it was a lot more aggressively handholdy back then, where they would continuously like, oh, as you mentioned, they want to press you, they want to hang in there for you. They got really excited. It's cute when they're like, oh, you give them like an item and they're like, they're thrilled to bits or something. And but as far as like gameplay wise, like it kind of didn't. I mean, it obviously didn't affect competitive play for players, but in the story, I guess it kind of makes you continue to have more of an attachment to your Pokemon, and they kept leaning into that, especially nowadays where with every iteration of Pokemon, it's more and more easier to help train your Pokemon to be competitive to the point where it's almost brain dead easy in Scarlet and Violet at this point.
Right. I guess another big thing about difficulty is you get EXP share after the first gym. So you don't get it right at the start. You have at least one gym, but from there on, experience share is just like you can always have it.
And it's the new experience share where it splits it between all your Pokemon rather than just one. And I remember that being very controversial at the time. And I remember the first time I played this, I turned it off. I distinctly remember not using it because I was just so like, and I still have that complaint about this. I feel like that the experience share is too aggressive because it feels like I don't get to use my entire team.
Yeah.
It's just
there's no need to anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest thing in the favor of this game, though, is you can turn it off, whereas after this, that's not the case. So even if it did sort of introduce that easier difficulty, it was optional.
One of the major things that very significant thing about this generation is that it's the smallest one. There's only 72 Pokemon introduced with this generation, and that there's never been a generation with that few introduced, but looking at them again, like, there's not very many that I dislike from this set of 72. I think it's a very strong lineup of Pokemon, honestly.
I think it's pretty close to all killer, no filler. There's definitely some weaker ones on the weaker end. Like, I've never been a big fan of Spritzy or Binacle. But then you have others that are just awesome, like Tyrantrum, Aurora. So it's a great fossil Pokemon. The birth of Hawlucha. Like, there are some great Pokemon in here. Noivern is another good one, and yeah, I think overall the Pokemon selection is great. I remember getting an Aegislash and loving Aegislash throughout the entire run.
Yeah. And
they recontextualize, like Daniel mentioned Fairy type earlier, but they take older Pokemon and sort of change their dynamics, which that's pretty big too. And Mega Evolutions, as cool as they are as well, they probably also impacted how many new ones there are, because they are pretty much new designs.
Yeah, that's true. We got like I like all this. There was a lot of love for Kanto in this game. Like all those starters for the like Bulbasaur, Charmander, Squirtle, they all had Mega Evolutions. Charizard had 2 because, of course, fan favorite Charizard's gonna have 2. Mewtwo had 2 as well, Mega Evolutions.
Yep.
There's a lot of Kanto love. Like, there's a lot of Kanto Pokemon you can get in this game. I remember Santaloon Forest just looked like Viridian Forest in its layout, just kind of shifted down, just like, whoa, the fan base is gonna be loving that one because that favoritism towards Gen 1 was strong in this one.
it led to a lot of Kanto exhaustion. People were so. I think this is the beginning of the whole Gen 1ers term. About all this appeal to Gen 1 and like trying to bring back those old fans, and to the point that new fans got sick of them. And there's like, oh, okay, we got these again.
Yeah.
And to a degree, I understand it. I completely get it. There was just too much focus on Gen 1 when the other gens had a lot to offer as well. And I think they finally got a balance on that now.
Yeah, they still like pulling out Charizard whenever they get a chance, but yeah.
I mean, it's Charizard.
Yeah,
Charizard. That's just never going away. It's same like thing with Mewtwo, but you want to get people excited, here's Mewtwo.
Yeah. How did you feel about the region itself? France was made real. Like Daniel was saying earlier about how this was the game that introduced clothes customization. I guess having Paris as the base region for that's just kind of the perfect way to introduce like shops and things. And this is one of the first Pokemon games to really give us a huge, robust city. Black and White came close, but you could circle along the central city in like a full 3D space with a camera that would move behind you for that city. And it really did feel like a more robust sort of Paris kind of setting.
I think this is a very solid region. Yeah. Linear in the same way that Unova is, but there's a lot of memorable places. Like it's hard to forget the main city. You have some interesting areas all around. I think there's always something fun to see. The caves are definitely a weak spot for it. Like they're very short. Yeah. You're never in a cave for very long. I think that's an aspect, but the overworld itself, pretty solid.
I found, I forget which Pokemon it was, but there was a Pokemon that moves around the region. And I got to that point in the mountains where you've got to sort of traverse through on a ride-on Pokemon, and it was just tedious to keep doing that again and again. If you're flying everywhere, it's totally fine. But if you're going on foot everywhere, it can get a little bit tedious.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I mean, they wanted to give you a reason to use Ride Pokemon, but they were a bit too aggressive with the layout to keep on having to switch between all of them to get from one place to another. So, I mean, in the story, like, it's fine because you don't want to just breeze right through everything. But going back and backtracking, as you were saying, hunting Pokemon like that, it gets a bit obnoxious as time goes on.
What about the story? Do we like the characters in X and Y? Because I'm going to tell you now, I don't.
Listen,
there's a balance, but go ahead, Daniel.
Pokemon Scarlet and Violet did the whole friendship circle so much better than this game. This game wishes it would be that good. I mean, your core crew of friends, like, I only remember either if you're Kaylin or Serena. Yeah. Like, all you needed was the rival character that you didn't choose, like the gender you didn't choose, honestly. The others, I hardly remember them.
I remember there being one sweet scene, and that's it, with Shauna. That's it. Like, you got to hang out at that one mansion with her, looking at the night sky. I was like, this is sweet.
I forgot Shauna. I mean, again, Shauna's like the only one I actually do kind of remember because of that, I think.
Yeah, and then there's Tierno and Trevor, and they're each on their own journey, and you fight them a little bit, but there's nothing much. But because you have them, your rival opposite gender character never got much development. They're just sort of a generic, yes, I want to become a champion as well, but they had no personality to them.
Yeah.
And I think that it really did feel like the beginning of the lack of good rivals for a while. That being said, I distinctly remember people going wild for Professor Sycamore. It's like, oh, he's hot.
Yeah, there's always a thirst character in Pokemon. There's always at least one.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, there's definitely that one that can cause the thirst, and I personally appreciate the kind of the lore that got extended thanks to Az. I'm not sure how they actually say his name, but that was interesting. Just like this whole concept of a Pokemon war and the origin of the Mega Evolution, and like there's potential there with this world-ending stuff. But then you have an awful villain that's so obvious and so boring like Lysander that just ruins it.
He had a reason. He tried to nuke the whole region, but I mean, he had some motives at least.
What were the motives? He just wants his Pokemon back. Is that it?
I don't know, man. It's been a while. I know. I don't think I hated him as much as other people did, but I know some people just don't like the villain leader.
9,000 years. That's all I remember from him.
Team Flare.
Yeah. Team Flare is a pretty weak team as well. Again, very generic and just,
I totally forgot Team Flare once Team Skull came in the next generation. I'm just like, oh, this is peak over here. But yeah, not really the strongest group in any Pokemon game, honestly. But yeah, I'm looking at chat right now. He wanted to reset the world, as Moonroad is saying. I was like,
oh, okay. I was trying to find his motivation just because it's so forgettable. And yeah, the reset the world thing. How do we feel about our champion, Diantha?
I'll let Dan take the reins.
I like her design, but I feel like they didn't utilize her enough in the story itself. Like, they could have used her more throughout the story. Like, obviously there's not going to be a champion that's used like quite as much as, for example, Leon in Sword and Shield, who's just there throughout the entire story, constantly your goal, and that your rival has a direct relation to. But I kind of like Diantha as she is. I don't mind her, honestly.
Another cool design too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, John.
I don't have like crazy strong feelings either way, to be honest. I feel this about most of the characters in this game. Like there's a few cool ones, but for the most part, I find them quite forgettable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a reason Cynthia stands out compared to everybody else. That just has that coolness factor, but also like she will beat your ass, and you get that a little bit with Diantha. But not quite to that same degree. I don't remember her being too tricky to take on. Yeah, it was just sort of whatever. And I don't remember too much of the other Elite Four. Some of the gyms, I remember some of the gym leaders, but that's mainly because of the anime.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's in retrospect, like Sun and Moon really took the idea of what a 3D Pokemon could be way further. Like you had probably like full-sized models, the camera would shift more, it felt more like a 3D environment, and then just the whole idea of taking Pokemon into a different direction, like getting rid of gyms, having a totally different vibe, like this sort of Hawaiian style, a very different Pokemon designs. Like that is a very distinct game. And when I think back of 3DS Pokemon, that's generally what I think of. Whereas for me, like X and Y, I can play it, I enjoy it, I have some good memories of it, but I don't know, it just kind of feels like another Pokemon that happens to be the shift to 3D.
I still think X and Y did some things that stand out. I mean, obviously being the first in 3D, you did some things that you can't do in sprite work. Like when you get to a route, or certain routes will have you super zoomed in, and then as you start moving around, you get that nice zoom out, that pan out. Things you can't do in with the sprite work. You did a little bit of that in Black and White. I remember there was like some dynamic shifts, but the way they do it in X and Y just kind of set the standard for what they would do in games like Sun and Moon in other games as well. But looking back on it, yeah, it's looking at the models compared to Sun and Moon and then X and Y, like the little squat chibi sprites, I'm just a lot better to have them be normal sized. Yeah. I much prefer that, honestly.
Yeah, it does look better, but it really did feel like the first step towards, we finally getting something akin to Pokemon. Blanking on the name, the GameCube Pokemon games.
Colosseum.
Darkness.
Yeah, Colosseum. In Pokemon form, and that eventually did happen, but this was the step towards that. I also like how they handled the trainers, since they didn't have the models show up when you fight them. You actually had really good artwork. And this is something where Pokemon just has always killed it. Their character designs are just incredible across the board. There's obviously some misses here and there, but for the most part, man, they look good.
Yeah. I have one complaint, might be a nitpick, but actually, no, this is about base movement, not a nitpick. I didn't love how the circle pad was always roller skates. If you want to move with the without roller skates, you've got to use the D-pad. You've got to sacrifice 3D movement. If you want to just sort of move with speed, you have to use those slippery roller skates. It can be awkward to get through doors. I didn't like that.
No.
It's also annoying that when you're walking with the D-pad, you're suddenly in that Game Boy era of only being able to move in 4 directions, and just let me move on my feet without the skates on. That was kind of annoying for me too. It was nice for places like Lumino City where you could just really get back and forth really quickly. It was made for that, honestly, but in other places not so much. I just want to get into the Pokemon Center and I'm just like fumbling around at the door.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of critiques you can throw at X and Y, but they did come at the right time. The 3DS, as most of you remember, launched in March 2011, not to a great success. It was a failing system, it was too expensive, it didn't have the games. It took a price cut. It took Iwata cutting his salary. It took Mario 3D Land and Mario Kart 7.
Ocarina of Time.
Ocarina of Time 3D. But Pokemon didn't show up until 2 years after that launch. And in fact, I think Black and White launched like a month before the 3DS even. So Game Freak were not there for this system. And when X and Y came, like, the 3DS had started to turn around. It was doing a bit better. But this was really the game that sort of skyrocketed the system. This is what got it into the hands of not just the core Nintendo fan, but everyone. So even if I think it's generic, it definitely did a ton for the system. And without it, 3DS wouldn't be where it was.
And honestly, Pokemon is kind of perfect for the 3DS and the DS systems. We'd seen it already on the DS, but just that clamshell design, having all the battle information on the bottom screen, being able to interact with use that bottom screen in this game specifically to interact with your Pokemon, it's kind of perfect. It was like actually one of the big fears from going from 3DS to Switch, losing that cleanness, I guess is the best way to put it.
You could also have like your online details on the bottom screen, so like you can interact with get like battle requests and things, and yeah, that was super cool.
Yeah, they were very smart with how they utilized the 3DS's UI and all those features in that generation. Especially, they pretty much made it their own thing by the 3DS games, Sun and Moon, Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, Omega's Movie Alpha Sapphire. Yeah.
Here's a question too. Did X and Y have better online than Sun and Moon?
I don't remember.
So Sun and Moon had like that festival circle, and X and Y, I felt it was more seamless. They go back and forth with how good online is with these games. I mean, like Let's Go had like a password system for some reason. I feel like X and Y was a little bit more user friendly than Sun and Moon's was, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah.
Might have been. I can't. I don't remember going online too often.
Yes.
Okay, I believe them. I believe them.
I trust you.
All right. Well, is there anything else you guys want to say about these games before we start to wrap this thing up?
This was definitely the era where Pokemon was being a little, just making it a different shift, not just towards the 3D era, but also this was the first time that we got like original animations. This is when we got Pokemon Origins, the animation.
Oh and
towards the end of that one, it definitely highlighted Mega Evolution, which was like super weird to see because this is supposed to be talking about Red going through Gen 1, and then it ends with something from Gen 6, and I thought that was really cool with Mega Charizard.
And then it's also the X and Y anime, which I think is still one of the top tier seasons of the anime. Like it took what's a pretty generic story and made it one of the best set of tales in the anime. And I guarantee that probably helped a lot too, just those hype moments. And also a big reason why Greninja is so popular.
Yeah.
Because it was just cool. You had that uniqueness to it thanks to Ash Greninja.
Right.
And all that. So I think that really helped pump up kids. And the thing is, in a lot of ways you can compare it to Red and Blue. Because it doesn't have as many of the features that later games would have. But for those growing up with it, getting introduced to those features, getting on the ground floor, not really having a comparison to what came before and seeing how it improved since then. It's like, it all originated from this. I can see why it would have that sort of like reverence. So not like, just like, I like this. These were good games.
Yeah. I do fully expect that Sword and Shield will have a resurgence with the people who played that when they were kids in like 10 years time. Because it's a fine Pokemon game at its core, and if it's your first one, it probably will have good memories with it. A funny thing about X and Y, Dave was talking about the anime. The anime had X, Y, and Z eventually. And throughout the entire life of X and Y, people were like, Z's coming.
That's when we'll get our post-game content.
Yeah. This was the first Pokemon mainline game. I guess Black and White had sequels. So they kind of had it. But this was the first mainline game not to have an iterative version. No third version.
It was still really weird, and I feel like it should have been there. There were a lot of signs and breadcrumbs that it was supposed to happen, but it just never came into fruition.
Yeah, it definitely got rolled into Sun and Moon with having to find all those Zygarde pieces.
Yes.
The last thing about this that I'll say is it's missing something that I've long lamented us not having since Pokemon X and Y, and this is the last game that had a theme when you're using the bike. And I think that's tragic that we don't have any more bike themes anymore. I think that's criminal.
Squire was just saying that the soundtrack is baller, and the soundtrack is baller. Yeah, there's some really great tracks in here, whether it's the city tracks or the route tracks. They're all great. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I just remembered. I was looking through here. It's like, wait a second. Usually, nowadays, especially like at the time of Gen 4 and Gen 5, they were just cranking out legendaries like and mythics like crazy, and they greatly held back here because we got 3 legendaries and 3 mythical Pokemon. That's it.
Yeah,
as far as new ones,
it's kind of refreshing.
Really, made it simple to collect, but I definitely lowered that post game. There was a reason you're hunting down all the legendaries in the Mega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then Sun and Moon just went ham with like the Ultra Beast and everything.
Mm-hmm. That went crazy with those.
Yeah.
But I guess speaking of that, do you have any favorite Pokemon of this generation? Like, was there someone that you had to have on your team when you played this game? For me, like, gosh, where do I have that? Yeah, you mentioned earlier, even though it was just a sword and a shield, Aegislash is like really cool to me. I don't care if it's not really, it's a ghost steel type. I think that's really awesome. We mentioned Holucha as well. Pangoro. I love Pangoro. Just a really cool design. One of the coolest ones is, I think, Vivillon. Your generic, like, your bug type that has 3 stages of evolution. Because in every region of the world, there's a different pattern and design for Vivillon. So, like, if I were to play the game and trade with John, he would have a different pattern, and you could like go ahead and trade with people around the world. And I thought that was really cool, like a way to kind of utilize wonder trading.
This was the game that also introduced Sylveon, right? So it was a fairy Eevee.
Yeah.
I love that design. Yeah,
it's a great design.
It's probably one of my favorites of the gen.
I know everybody loves Greninja, but I love the Fennekin line.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
great.
Yeah.
Fire Psychic, I was in heaven with that whole reveal. Poor Chespin, such a great initial design, and then gets destroyed. Like, just terrible evolutions.
The Fennekin line's interesting because like the second one is kind of the more popular one, and that's what made it into Pokken as a fighter.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
I think the long dress or whatever for its fur kind of made Delphox not as viable. It just, especially with all the fire coming out of its ears, makes it look like an old man with a lot of ear hair type thing.
An old wizard.
I'm looking through the Pokemon, and I think my team was like Sylveon, Aegislash, I had Tyrantrum, Hawlucha, and I can't remember the others, but I do love Trevenant's design.
Well, I think that's probably about it for now, guys. I feel like we all kind of enjoy this generation, but it's not any of our favorites. We will say that Ash Paulson, though, does really love X and Y. And it's a shame he couldn't be here, but he can champion it in the comments if he wants to. And if you enjoyed it...
The thing is, I get why people like it. I think that's where I come from. It may not be my favorite, but I get it.
Yeah,
I think there's value. There's definitely value in every Pokemon generation, and I think this one does have its merits, and it does, it has things introduced that have carried even today to Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, so you gotta respect it for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we'll look back on other Pokemon games in the future, maybe ones that we actually do adore, like Black and White, which I know we're all pretty big fans of. So if you like this, then maybe we'll do one of those as well. But thank you for watching, everybody, especially those in live audience, that little corner over there. If you want to join them, you can watch this way before it goes live, way before any edits, see every mistake we make for just $5 a month. And you also get access to a lot of early videos and behind-the-scenes content, so check that out if you want to. But thank you just for watching this and supporting us in general. So, again, we appreciate you coming along for this journey, and let us know what you think about Pokemon X and Y in the comments below. We'll see you guys next time. Bye.
So we meet again.
Bye.